I've been in meetings before where someone goes, I don't feel like we're shipping that many. And it just doesn't feel like that. And I go, well, I have data that shows it otherwise. And my data will trump your feelings every single day because the data doesn't lie. So it's important that as a small business that you're still aiming to try to gather data, because as you start to scale, and you've talked about it on some of your other podcasts about the use of AI, you have to have all those data points behind it if you're eventually going to embrace and engage with AI.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the video podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. In this podcast, we speak to industry leaders who share their ideas, thoughts, and anecdotes from within the logistics world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chain Reaction podcast. Today we have Stephen Holcomb. He is a head of logistics operations at Refeyn, and he is a very, very interesting guest who has quite a lot of experience in this space at various kind of size of the companies. And this is probably something that we'd like to explore today. So, Stephen, can I ask you to start with how you ended up in logistics? That's always a very interesting starting point of podcasts that I have.
Yeah, sure. Great to be on here, Michael. So my story of getting into logistics actually started when I was at university. I went to university thinking I was going to do a business degree in management information systems. I did Excel. I was really into computers. And then I took a survey course in operations and supply chain, and something just ticked. It just hit the right button with me. And I just went, I love this. Putting everything into order, rearranging everything, making sure that the top priorities were met, and just looking at supply chain and all that kind of stuff. It resonated with me somewhere, I don't know, deep in my logistics soul, if you will. I was just hiding in there, and I immediately. I think I was 2 weeks into the class, and then I went up to my advisor and changed my major immediately, and just embraced it fully, and ended up with a supply chain and logistics degree, and then went on and even did a healthcare operations, so supply chain logistics within like the life sciences field, MBA after that. And it's just something that it just suits me to the T. I'll just love it. It's great stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it just was, it just happened that way.
No,
You just get exposed to it, and it's great.
Interesting. Pretty much everyone that I've ever spoken with is somehow is one way or the other is an accident at a different points of their journey, kind of in life. But it is accident, and it's as you said, it's rightly, it's something clicks, something that is just like, oh, it's fascinating, and it's just like it's like an onion. So you peel a couple layers, and then just something opens up. It's like, oh, that's actually so much more than what I thought it was. It's not just trucks and sheds. There is actually so many interesting things. And but can you talk a little bit about your career? Because what we talked about earlier, and you said that you were working in both and the larger businesses like the GSKs and the huge logistics operations, as well as and today and also in kind of a smaller startup environment. This is quite an interesting contrast that I'd like us to explore a little bit, because people and the businesses of different scales, I think they treat logistics differently, and I'd like to get your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked for some very large multinationals, some very large medical device multinationals, and then also I was on the consumer health division for GSK, which spun off and became Halion. And then I've also been with some small medical device companies, and also with some other life sciences. So with a company that did genomics, which was like a DNA sequences and
Right.
and instruments for those as well. So there's a varied experience there. And with the large multinationals, you can sometimes feel like you might be able to affect things within your team or maybe within your department, but you just don't have that full upstream and downstream touch that you do within like small companies or startups, where you can really feel like you can make an effect on the business in terms of the decisions that are made from the beginning of the product life
Mm,
cycle and all the way through the end of it. So when you eventually are looking at like disposal of your assets at the end of it. So the small startup style companies really allow you to have a further reach and a further impact when you're ready for that. Early on in your career, I'm not sure that you're ready for that kind of responsibility of making those decisions about packaging and about sustainability and kind of challenging some of those decisions that are made. But as you start to feel like you're further along in your career and you feel like you have that empowerment to do so,
mm.
especially within a small company, it can be rather rewarding.
Well, I understand in the bigger corporations that typically the functions tend to be and the colleagues tend to be quite kind of compartmentalized, and it's very kind of very specific. So teams could be focusing on a very specific aspects of supply chain, whether somebody is looking for like sourcing packaging, and somebody's looking at I don't know wrapping machines, and somebody's looking at well deciding what the height of the pallet should be. But can you maybe explore a bit more on specific challenges, not just in the startup environment, but also in the cold chain, in the types of businesses that you were running? What are the specifics that were that were I don't know keeping you awake at night?
um, um, I'd say that some of the challenges as you're in like a small business, there's that jack of all trades, master of none. So you really struggle when people come to you and they just assume, especially if they've also come from large companies, that when they come to someone in a certain department, that they'll have all the same answers as they do when they took it to the department that they were in with that large company. So, for instance, they would say bring something to logistics, and then logistics in a large company, say like Johnson and Johnson, you'll have someone who is the director of cold chain management. You'll have someone who's the director of packaging for cold chain management. You'll have someone who like
Right.
this is their full-time job, whereas and that is just a small percentage of my role. So you have to be able to um, one be willing to be humble when someone brings you that and you say, look, I may not have all the answers, but I'll work on it and I'll see what I can come up with. Or you may have to partner with them. Um, and then, two, you have to realize that you can't be everything to everyone. And know that you have to find partners in it, whether that is suppliers or partners within the business who might have some of that experience, um, or in setting expectations with people who bring you those items, so they know that you're going to be working through it and that you're on a journey together with them. Uh, so that's really key within the small businesses because you are doing so many different things from designing boxes for finished goods or boxes for transport or
Mm.
choosing your cold transport containers or choosing your cold transport methods, whether it's passive or active, stuff like that. So tag that with all your normal courier stuff and your warehouse and your inventory, and the management of all those processes. So it's I, I find it exhilarating and absolutely a blast.
No, I completely understand. What criteria you use though to select potential partners? Because you mentioned that there's quite a lot depends on the quality and the ability of partners to deliver the service the right way, at the right time, the right quality. So, but upfront, when you don't have experience working with a partner, how do you go about selecting them?
I I think for me, I tend to try to choose partners um, that have the heart of a teacher,
Mm,
because, like I said, being a jack of all trades and a master of none, I try to find partners who I know they have a specialty in something. So whether that's someone who has a specialty in getting cross border into Europe now, especially with Brexit having occurred, or finding somebody who has more international uh, transport experience or cold chain management. So I find them and I know that they are specific into that. They may not know anything about packaging in terms of finished goods packaging, but they definitely know about cold chain transport. And then in having conversations with them, figuring out are they interested in bringing me along on the journey and knowing that my growth will result in better results for them, or are they just interested in capturing, but they're not willing to work with me on some of the corrections or some of the help along the way
Mm.
to help me find good solutions that are viable for us to use going forward. Um, so, for instance, I partnered with a company uh, who they would review our commercial invoice format. So we have our templates set up. And while I have a lot of experience with commercial invoices, I'm definitely not an expert, but the person who I partnered with at this company, they had an entire department who could possibly review commercial invoices to understand, like, oh, are there additional statements that need to go on them to be able to facilitate a quicker transition through customs in various different countries. And there are specialists who we can try to employ, consultants, but I try to look for partners who realize that in helping me with that,
Mm.
we'll grow together, and that they'll obtain more revenue, which is their ultimate goal, isn't it? They want
Yeah.
to obtain revenue, but means that they're also helping me along in my journey.
That's very interesting. I think what you are highlighting is a practical example, because many logistics business, pretty much all of the logistics businesses, that are talk about, well, we're trying to be partners with our clients. We're trying to be in partnership kind of arrangements, and but what does it mean exactly? So, and I think you brought up a very important point, saying it's a bit more about teaching. So they know something you don't, so they bring you with them on a journey. They do something for you. They give you either knowledge or advice or support, something that will help you. I mean, of course they're growing their business, of course it's they're not charities. They're there to make money, but they actually help you be
Yeah,
better. They
absolutely.
may they may improve your packaging. I don't know, stability of your packaging, so you can have, I don't know, larger pallets, for example. You can save some money on deliveries. This is very interesting. But can we talk a little bit more specifically about the cold supply or cold chains?
Yeah, sure. With my current company, we ship a lot of stuff on dry ice at this moment, which is the passive form of doing cold chain management. So you have passive and active. Active being machines that are controlling the temperatures that's going along, and then passive usually using phase change material, ice packs,
Mm,
or dry ice, depending on the temperature. And for us, some of the challenges that we have is because of the complexity of what we are shipping. So we're shipping proteins, VLP, virus-like particles,
mm,
associated adenoviruses, AAVs, and these kind of things. They they're a trigger for CBP, Customs Border Patrol, where as soon as they see something that says virus, whether if they read the fuller further words, they can let it go, or AAVs. None of these are active viruses, but because of that, it triggers Customs Border Patrol to just freeze a package and just hold it for a while. And in doing so, it then means that our cold chain management needs to be able to sustain through that period, whether that's putting enough dry ice into the container, so finding containers large enough, or if that means that we partner with a supplier who can uh, re-up all the ice and replenish the dry ice within the box. Of course, if we use more dry ice, it has a sustainable impact. And then also, if we have a smaller box, then we have to rely upon the supplier to be able to um, replenish the dry ice. And we've had failures on both of those where we haven't put enough dry ice in, or we had a box that didn't make it, or we didn't have the dry ice be replenished by the supplier. And those are some of the challenges that we've had to face through this. Um, and then also trying to monitor the shipment to make sure that it at least stayed at its appropriate temperature before it was received by our customers.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit flocks.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
But it's quite. But the interesting, the bit that you
Yeah,
mentioned, because my understanding was in a kind of a diagnostic and a management equipment is I didn't think it would require actually kind of the cold chain. So or cold chain supply, kind of supply chain requirements. And I wonder whether you
yeah.
also have some ambient parts and how you treat that if you have, especially if you have a shipment that requires both type of kind of the temperature control kind of setups
Yeah,
and how you
it's
manage
all right.
that.
It's all right. So the ambient shipments are probably our easiest shipments because typically they're going through without any requirement for cold chain management, and and often they're very standard parts that can try and get through customs pretty quickly, which is actually really really makes it a whole lot easier. We do tend to split them into different containers, and often because of the challenges that we've seen with our cold chain transport, we often will also split them into separate consignments because it means that if one can get through and the other one kind of gets stuck because of some of the triggers like virus um, or proteins and stuff like that, then at least the ambient materials can make it through and will get to the customer because sometimes our customers will have their own VLPs or AAVs on site that they can possibly use. So by splitting them up, and there's a little bit more of an additional cost because of it, because it's separate consignments, but it does mean that the stuff that can usually make it through does make it through, and at least part of our shipment will make it into our customers.
But one of the things I definitely would like to explore is because we did touch upon uh, scale, as in
Okay.
working in a kind of the smaller startup or the smaller businesses versus the larger ones. But I think the very interesting bit
Okay.
is the transition from. So as the business grows, so as you're starting on a kind of a smaller base and you select potential partners that can satisfy your needs at that level, but then as you scale up, your needs increase or your needs change. So how you manage this kind of transition, especially in the constrained environments of cold chains, for example, that you operate in.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key things about either a startup or a very small business
Mm,
is that you often have a lot of very extremely dedicated people who have bought into the purpose of why the startup or the small business exists. And they're all involved in each other's business. It's kind of like a small family. You know where this person is, you know what this person does, you know why you put this into a box, and that tribal knowledge works just fine within that startup or a small business because everybody knows. And if
right.
someone new comes
Yeah.
in, there's enough people around to be able to ask. But as it starts to grow, that tribal knowledge becomes more of a burden than it does a blessing. Um, you have to try to identify that tribal knowledge as soon as possible when you come in, and you need to start to be able to document that. And even in a small business, um, there's a lot of people who
Yeah.
think that, oh well, we don't need SOPs or work instructions because there's three of us, right? So it doesn't really matter that much. We can all just talk about the process. But if you start to document it, even if it's just as simple as, even if you feel like it's wrong and the process is wrong, documented anyways. And it doesn't take that much to actually put together a work instruction or an SOP, but you start to document that stuff so you have that available. And you do that with everything. And it's especially important for cold chain management because we ship on dry ice, even though the requirement for some of our materials wouldn't
Mm,
necessarily need to keep it at negative 50 degrees, and maybe only need to keep it at, say, negative 18 degrees, which you can accomplish with other things. But because of the way in which we ship and the distances we ship, we want to make sure that all of our staff follows the exact same process. And so you can have somebody else fill in and so it's that's the
yeah.
important thing is that making sure that you take that tribal and you start to
Mm,
document it as quickly as possible. So at least you have it because then you can also sit down with all of your staff and as you start to scale, look at it and go, okay, if I were to multiply this by 1,000, does this process still work? Will it work if I have to do this 1,000 times today? And you go, no, it doesn't. And the only reason you know that is because it's
right.
documented.
Yeah.
Whereas in when it's tribal knowledge, you don't get to have that. People are with tribal knowledge, they're constantly adjusting on the fly as they're doing things. And then another thing that you need to start doing right away is data collection. Um, even if your even if your data integrity is not the greatest, you need to at least start looking at how do you collect data, and then you can start to evaluate that data right away. So you're either setting to be able to measure your KPIs. So the work that you are doing and documenting those SOPs, and as you start to scale, is it are you getting the results that you need? And if you're looking at them and they don't make sense, then you have to look at your data integrity and you start to fix that foundational data stuff. But um, for someone who got into logistics because he originally went to school for because he really loved Excel spreadsheets for some reason, like the data is so important for evaluation. I've been in meetings before where someone goes, "I don't feel like we're shipping that many," and it just doesn't feel like that. And I go, "Well, I have data that shows it otherwise, and my data will trump your feelings every single day because." The data doesn't lie. So it's important that as a small business that you're still aiming to try to gather data because as you start to scale and you've talked about it on some of your other podcasts about the use of AI, you have to have all those data points behind it if you're eventually going to embrace and engage with AI. And so to have that data now and to be embracing that data and collecting those data points, and you need to find that within whatever ERP you have in there and find the person who is absolutely amazing at ERP and become their best friend. And they will help you make sure that you can collect all the appropriate data that you need to make the proper decisions moving forward.
Well, there's so many things to unpack there. One is I definitely agree with you on I call it industrializing or professionalizing processes. When stuff sits in people's head and people know how things are happening, well, it's not scalable. And if you bring in a new person on board, how would you educate them? Because are they going to invent stuff for themselves or discover
Exactly.
that's how the cookie crumbles, or they actually learn something that is kind of documented in some way? I mean, sometimes I've seen those documents being verbose and then people getting quite bored reading all of those things. I've had a comment like too many letters. I'm not going to read this. But on the other hand, well, actually, documenting things also helps thinking through. That's
Correct.
what I found as well. It's like, oh, right. Because as you try to kind of write it down, you're trying to explain it, like, oh, well, actually, it doesn't work always that way. But you need to either talk about exceptions or, well, it doesn't feel right. Actually, maybe it should be done slightly differently. So even the process itself helps you to improve things. And the second thing to unpack is exactly the data. Well, we are coming from a point of the platform that we're building, that we built as well as, I wouldn't say that we're fighting Excel spreadsheets, but we try to also industrialize the process of using data.
Hmm.
And trick there is also, I had one client said there's too much data but not enough information.
Yeah. I,
Which is also true. Sometimes people have data for the data's sake, and they could be having data lakes, and it's like, and then when you fish in the murky waters, and whatever is gonna come out, you never know, and every time you get a different answer to the same question, which is also not good. So kind of so it almost kind of comes back to the process of, or sort of to the point of having the standardized process and approach and have enough data foundation to then be able to have a very clear and transparent foundation for decision making. You know precisely what you're looking at. You know what the numbers are. Exactly as you said, in logistics, well, the feelings don't really cut it. I mean, you need to know what's going on exactly.
Yeah, yeah. For instance, sometimes, and especially from salespeople out in the field, they always talk to the customers, and the only time that they really hear from their customers is when something has gone wrong. So then you get a lot of information back saying, "Oh, it's taking so long to deliver to them. Why is this?" And then you come back and you go, "Look, here's all the data points. We're delivering in 1.8 days. That's 1.8 days globally that we're delivering. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad, does it?" And then the salesperson goes, "Oh." Okay, so I mean, can we look at this one example? You go, yeah, absolutely. We'll look at this one example. We'll see what went wrong with that one. See if there needs to be a change to a process. But let's talk about when it comes to actual deliveries. and the KPIs of those, where those sit. And that's where the data is so important. And one thing I always say about data or anything when someone says, "Oh, I didn't tell you about it," I can always ignore an email that you send me. I can always delete out a column of data that is there. I can never make those up. I can't add that in magically. I can't ever do something with something I've never had. But if we just collecting it, as long as you're not using additional resources to collect that, but if it's just something that's part of your ERP, certainly should just try to capture those, and you can always ignore the data that you don't need.
No, 100%, and this is absolutely critical. One of the last questions I'd like to ask guests on the podcast, and we talked about the supply relations and the way that you choose your suppliers, and we talked about data. I think one of the elements that the industry is wrestling with or grappling with is the issue of trust. And by
Yeah.
trust, I mean, uh, how can you be sure that the other party not just does what they're supposed to do, but how, it's like there's no data leakages, there is no nobody tries to either I don't know, take one over the other, or steal clients or something. So there's unfortunately there is lack of trust in the sector, is a kind of between the parties vertically and then horizontally among competitors, because it's a very, very competitive space. So how, I mean, there's lots of stories around that. I'd like to take your perspective on this. So how do you view that issue? Is that an issue from where you're sitting? And maybe some of the either stories or the ways that you think the trust can be improved or can be gained between potential partners.
Yeah, it's something that always sat with me from a long, long time ago was back in university when they were talking about how the best way for any two businesses, people, teams, anything to grow is that there's an inherent trust that you need to think that if we can open ourselves up and realize what we're both after, then we can both obtain it a whole lot sooner or in greater rewards than if we were very guarded and we just kept things to ourselves.
Mm,
And it's something that I try to take to a lot of my suppliers. And so um, when I engage with my suppliers, I tell them right from the beginning, I'm a very open and honest person. If things aren't going right, I'll let you know.
yeah.
And if things are going right, I'll definitely let you know as well. And we need to understand like what are you trying to achieve and what are we trying to achieve. And so, if I'm speaking with some suppliers for some packaging, and they want to bring forward something that is completely made out of recyclable material that can then be disposed of immediately at the end. But I'm aiming after something that is reusable because in the reuse, reduce, recycle cycle of it, the
Right.
most important one is to reduce, but then reuse. So I have to lay myself out there a little bit to make sure that they understand exactly what I'm after and does that align with what they are. And you can kind of get a feel from some people sometimes as they're starting to go, okay, yeah, we can do this or we can do that, or and you just get this feel from them whether or not they're being genuine about what
You
they're
get some
trying to
reciprocity
achieve.
from them, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I did have it. I had a supplier who showed up, and it was an incumbent supplier when I came into a business, and they showed up to a meeting, and they were saying, "We really appreciate your business. By the way, I brought two bottles of rum for you guys because there was two of us there, and just as a little thank you." And I immediately said, "Look, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to refuse these. I'm not going to take them because this is not how we do business here. You'll remain our supplier." If you're doing a good job and you're offering us a good value for money, and we think that you are here to grow with us. And I pushed them straight back across the table, and they said, "Oh, they weren't that expensive. Take them anyways." And I said, "No, this is not how we're going to operate here. We are certainly going to focus on, are you the right supplier for us?"
Yeah.
And in the end, they continued to do those sorts of things, and we said, no, this isn't who we want to partner with. And you could tell that from them offering those gifts like that.
Right.
They were trying to then get us to then feel like we owe them something. so we give them more business.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they broke that trust in that moment when they were trying to, buy me with some rum like I'm a pirate, you know. So
Right, right. No, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's probably it might be appropriate if you have worked with them for 5 years, you already know them, and
yeah,
you have good relationships. That would be almost like retrospective thank you for having a great
yeah,
business over time, but it's not an upfront kind of which looks like a bribe. It's like, well, okay, I want you to be, I want to start asking for some favors going forward, or I want you to have a favorable
yeah.
relationship with me because I've
If,
just given you a gift of rum, and by the way, it's cheap, which is kind of
yeah,
which
I'm an expensive rum kind of
also
guy.
goes against the whole thing. It's
But
like, yeah, come on, guys, what are
it
you
just
doing?
it just illustrated, like, we want to be able to, you know, operate in the yeah, yeah. And so it was a clear sign to me
Mm,
that I had to be on my guard a little bit. And then there were some other things that then eventually said, I think that this person is this company is, while we
right.
used them at the time
Right,
when we
right.
needed
Okay.
someone like that, I think that now we've grown outside of them and we need to move on to some of
No,
it.
that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense, and I think that gives. I think that's a very kind of a good note to kind of to end our podcast on. I think we definitely touched on quite a few very important points, and I'm glad that we had the conversation
Yeah.
on a few very practical elements, as well as those kind of anecdotal stories. I think that definitely. I think the Ram story. I'm sure that the listeners would be happy and chuckling to to hear about. But it does happen. It does
It
happen, and
does.
sometimes it's just. So either some businesses have like inappropriate behavior, or they have a slightly skewed thinking and the way of like, well, okay, if we give them some rum, they're going to give me some business. Well, actually, yeah, it not necessarily works that way.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. Sergio, it
Ah,
was great. It was great having you. I look forward to continue our conversations.
all right. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks for tuning into Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you have a story or opinions to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to Chain Reaction or visit flocks.is for more information. See you next time.